Imagine walking into the most advanced library in the world. It's not a sleek temple of glass and steel. It's a stone room in Milan, the year 383. The air is thick with the smell of beeswax from the lamps and the faint, dusty scent of aging papyrus. And it isn't silent. Not at all. The room hums. It breathes. A low, constant murmur of voices, a soft swarm of sound, because every single person in here is reading out loud. That's just how reading works. It's a performance. A public act. The words on the page are a musical score, and the human voice is the instrument that brings them to life. But then you see him. One man, Bishop Ambrose, sitting in the corner, illuminated by a sliver of Italian sunlight. He is one of the most powerful men in the Roman Empire. His eyes are flying across the page of a codex. But his mouth? It's closed. Motionless. He isn't making a sound. And the man watching him, a brilliant North African scholar named Augustine, is completely mesmerized. He's so stunned by this silent spectacle that he does what any good academic does when they witness the impossible: he writes it down. In his book, The Confessions, he records this moment as a kind of miracle. He puzzles over it, wondering if Ambrose does it to save his voice, or perhaps to avoid being interrupted by listeners asking questions. He saw a man consuming words without a voice. He saw a reader whose mind was a stage for one. Today, you are doing the exact same thing Ambrose did. The voice you hear right now is in your head, a silent interpretation of these words on your screen. To you, it's effortless. Normal. But to Augustine, one of the greatest minds of his time, it was a superpower. So how did we get from there, to here? How did reading escape our lips and build a private, soundproof room inside our minds? You're about to discover that it wasn't a miracle. It was a technology. A tiny, almost invisible invention, hidden in plain sight. It's so powerful, so fundamental, you are using it right this second to understand my words. And it's not a letter, or a mark of punctuation. It's a piece of nothing. To understand the revolution, you first have to feel the sheer, brutal difficulty of the problem. Before this invention, reading was an athletic event for the brain, a marathon for the mouth. I want you to truly visualize a text from antiquity. Not a neat paperback, but a heavy scroll of papyrus you have to unroll with both hands. Or an early codex, pages of stiff, crackling parchment. Now, look at the writing. Forget everything you know about clean typography. In most high-status Greek and Roman texts, there are no lowercase letters. There is almost no punctuation as we know it. And most critically, a choice that seems baffling to us today, there are no spaces between words. It's a solid, unbroken wall of letters. Scriptio continua, the Romans called it. Continuous script. WRDS justrm med2 gthrlikonelongne variandang gstrmofnk. Imagine trying to read an entire book like that. Your brain is suddenly forced to perform two intensely demanding jobs at once. First, it has to recognize the shape of each letter. That's the easy part. But second, it has to actively chisel the monolithic block of text into meaningful chunks, in real time. Where does one word end and the next begin? The page gives you zero clues. The text is a hostile beast, and it's your job to tame it. Let's try it with a slightly more complex phrase. I am nowhere. Does that mean, I am now here? Or does it mean, I am nowhere? Two completely opposite meanings are hidden in the exact same string of letters. Without context, without a shared understanding between you and the writer, the meaning is lost. You can't just see the answer. You have to find it. And how do they find it? By sounding it out. This is the crucial key. Ancient readers had to murmur the words, to whisper them, to feel the rhythm and the cadence of the language in their mouths and hear it with their ears. The tongue and the ear became decoding tools for the eye. They would physically voice the sounds until a recognizable word or phrase snapped into focus. It was a process of auditory trial and error. This is why the library, the scriptorium, hummed with voices. It wasn't a choice, it was a necessity dictated by the very form of the text. Reading wasn't a private dialogue between an author and a reader. It was a public broadcast. Often, the wealthy wouldn't even read their own texts, they'd have a trained slave, a lector, do the hard work of performing the text aloud for them. Reading was a specialized skill, and its natural state was oral. The materials themselves reinforced this difficulty. Papyrus, made from pounded reeds, was fragile and its surface fibrous, causing the ink from a reed pen to bleed slightly, softening the edges of the letters. Parchment, made from painstakingly prepared animal skin, was more durable but also had its own quirks. These weren't pristine, uniform sheets of paper. They were organic materials, and writing on them was an art. The entire system was built on one assumption: a reader is a speaker, a performer, trained in the rhetorical schools to cast lines of ink into breath and meaning. The page was a challenge, a testament to the skill of the person who could unlock it. Ambrose, reading silently in his corner, wasn't just being quiet. He was a Formula One driver in a world of horse-drawn carts. His brain had been trained to a phenomenal level, allowing him to process that solid wall of text at a speed that baffled his contemporaries. For everyone else, silence was not an option. The text simply wouldn't allow it. So, how do you break the chains that bind the written word to the spoken word? How do you democratize the superpower of silent reading for everyone? You don't invent a new letter. You don't create a new kind of ink. You do something far more radical. You engineer an absence. Now, let's travel forward a few hundred years from Ambrose's silent miracle. We need to leave the heart of the crumbling Roman Empire and go to its outermost edge. The windswept, rainy, remote edge of the known world. We're going to the monasteries of Ireland and Northumbria in the 7th and 8th centuries. This is the place you'd least expect a revolution in information technology to occur. But isolation is often a powerful catalyst for innovation. Imagine you are a young monk named Aidan in one of these monasteries. The world outside your stone walls is a chaotic mix of warring tribal kingdoms. Your mission, your entire life's purpose, is to preserve and copy the great texts of Latin Christianity, the Gospels, the writings of the Church Fathers like Augustine himself. But there is a huge, fundamental problem. Latin isn't your mother tongue. You speak Old Irish. You didn't grow up hearing the rhythms and flow of Latin spoken in the streets. To you and your brothers, it is a complex, foreign language you must learn from scratch. Now imagine your teacher hands you a Latin manuscript written in the old way, in scriptio continua. That solid wall of letters isn't just a fun intellectual challenge for you. It's a minefield. The chance of making a copying error, of running two words together incorrectly, of misinterpreting a crucial piece of scripture, it's terrifyingly high. A single mistake could alter the meaning of a sacred text, a doctrinal nightmare. You need a lifeline. You and your entire generation of non-native Latin speakers need a hack. So, driven by this intense practical need, you and your fellow scribes invent one. It's a piece of user interface design, an accessibility feature, conceived 1,300 years before the first line of computer code was ever written. Let's zoom in on your desk. You take your quill, carefully cut from the fifth feather of a goose's left wing so it curves perfectly into your right hand. You dip it into ink made from oak galls and iron salts. You copy a word. And then, you do the new thing. You lift the quill from the vellum. You move your hand a few millimeters to the right. And you leave a gap. A deliberate, purposeful breath of nothing. We can watch this innovation spread in the historical record. Look at the Catholic of St. Columba, one of the earliest surviving Irish manuscripts from the early 7th century. The spacing is there, but it's a bit shy. Tentative. Inconsistent. It's a new idea being tested. Then, you jump forward a few decades to the Book of Doe, created around 675. The gaps get more confident, more regular. And by the time we get to the breathtakingly beautiful Lindisfarne Gospels, crafted in Northumbria around the year 715, the choice is unmistakable. It's a core feature of the design. Words are no longer a flowing, confusing river of ink. They are islands. Separate. Distinct. Crystalline. Each is surrounded by a tiny, protective moat of silence. This isn't just about aesthetics. It is a fundamental software update for the written word in the West. It is one of the most important moments in the history of design. These scribes, working in their cold, damp cells, realized that by inserting absence, they could offload the most difficult cognitive task from the reader's brain, and build it directly into the page itself. The page now does the work of separating the words for you. The segmentation problem is solved before the reader even begins. The reader no longer has to be a star performer, a trained orator, decoding on the fly. Now, they can be, just a reader. A novice. A student. A private individual. And an entire ecosystem of innovation grows around this one change. A new style of writing, insular half-uncial, with its clear, distinct letter forms, makes each word island even easier to recognize. New marks of punctuation are introduced, not just for full stops, but to mark clauses and grammatical shifts, like little signposts on a highway. It's a complete system designed for one purpose, radical clarity. It saved the student time. It dramatically reduced copying errors. And it saved the tutor's throat from having to read everything aloud. This small, practical solution, born from the frustration of learning a second language on a rainy island, was about to go viral. And in doing so, it would change the very nature of thought in the Western world. Because once you can easily see words as separate units, something else becomes possible. Something Augustine thought was a miracle. You can finally read, with ease, without making a sound. A brilliant innovation in a remote monastery is one thing. But for our humble blank space to conquer a continent, it needed more than just a good idea. It needed power. It needed an empire. And, in the late 8th century, it got one. Enter Charlemagne, king of the Franks. This isn't just some local warlord. This is one of the most ambitious figures in history. He's a brilliant military strategist, a devout Christian, and a man obsessed with the idea of renewal, the Renovatio Imperii Romanorum, the renewal of the Roman Empire. He's forged a massive new empire stretching across modern-day France, Germany, and Italy. But he has a critical information crisis. His administrators, his priests, his scholars, they're all writing in dozens of different, messy, local scripts. They are inconsistent, filled with abbreviations, and incredibly difficult for anyone outside of that specific region to read. For an emperor trying to standardize laws, church liturgy, and education across a vast and diverse territory, this is an administrative nightmare. It's like every city is using a different, incompatible operating system with its own bizarre fonts. It is a barrier to unity, to power, to his grand vision of a new, Christian Rome. Charlemagne realizes he needs a universal standard. He needs a top-down, state-sponsored readability revolution. And to lead this monumental project, he imports the most famous scholar in Europe, a man named Alcuin of York. A scholar from Northumbria, the very heartland of the insular script revolution we just talked about. Alcuin and his team at Charlemagne's court effectively became the first UI/UX designers of the Middle Ages. They weren't just thinking about preserving knowledge, they were thinking about its transmission. About the user experience. They looked at all the available scripts, took the best elements from each, and synthesized a new masterpiece of design, Carolingian minuscule. The name itself gives a clue to one of its key innovations, minuscule, meaning lowercase. Before this, texts were often written in all caps. The Carolingian scribes standardized the use of lowercase letters with distinct ascenders and descenders, the little sticks on letters like B, D, P, and Q. These act like visual signposts, creating a unique and instantly recognizable silhouette for each word, making reading faster and more accurate. But their greatest achievement was to take the Irish innovation of word spacing and make it official imperial policy. This wasn't just a suggestion anymore. It was the law of the script. It was mandatory. Charlemagne's royal scriptoria, especially the one at Tours where Alcuin became abbot, became veritable factories of clarity. They churned out thousands upon thousands of manuscripts in the new, hyperlegible style. Open a Carolingian manuscript today, and it feels shockingly, uncannily modern. The breathing margins, the legible lines of lowercase text, the words floating like perfectly arranged objects on the page. You can read it, with relative ease, even if you don't know a word of Latin. This imperial standard spread like wildfire. By the 12th century, it was the default system across Europe. The book was no longer just a script for a performance. It had been refitted, retooled for a totally new and powerful function, private, rapid, silent reference. Now, with standardized spacing, paragraph marks, running titles, and chapter headings, a scholar could scan a book, search for information, and consume it silently and efficiently. Silent reading ceased to be a bishop's party trick. It became the default way to engage with a text in the cloisters, the royal courts, and the newly forming universities. The technology, born on a lonely island and forged in an empire, was complete. But what had it actually done, to the human mind? What truly changed inside our skulls when that blank space appeared on the page? Let's put on our neuroscientist goggles for a moment and look at the act of reading you're engaged in right now. Modern eye-tracking studies have revealed something amazing. Your eyes don't move smoothly across this sentence like a movie camera. They jump. They dart. They make tiny, ballistic movements called saccades. Your eye is leaping from one fixation point to another, absorbing information in chunks. In a world of old scriptio continua, your brain was constantly guessing where the next safe place to land was. It was like leaping between lily pads in a thick fog. The cognitive load, the amount of your working memory being used, was immense. A huge portion of your brain's processing power was tied up in the simple mechanical act of segmentation, of chiseling the words apart. It left less RAM available for the most important task, comprehension, thinking about what the words actually mean. The Irish hack, standardized by Charlemagne, changed everything. Word spacing cleared the fog. The lily pads became clear and distinct. Your eye knows exactly where to land. This simple external cue, the blank space, freed up massive amounts of cognitive resources. Your brain's RAM was no longer cluttered with the menial task of segmentation. It could now be fully dedicated to understanding, to analysis, to critique. The historian Paul Senger, in his landmark book Space Between Words, argued this was the pivotal moment. It wasn't that silent reading was strictly impossible before, we saw Ambrose do it. And we must acknowledge a crucial caveat: other writing systems, like Chinese with its logographic characters, developed robust traditions of silent reading without ever needing word spaces. But in the alphabetic scripts of the Latin West, spacing was the key that unlocked the practice on a massive scale. It made privacy routine, rather than exceptional. And with that privacy comes a door. The space between words created a space in the mind. A private, internal chamber that you could enter, alone, with a text. The metaphor of a room in your head isn't just a metaphor, it's what was built. Suddenly, a monk in his cell can practice Lectio Divina, divine reading, not by mumbling a verse for hours, but by silently contemplating it, letting it dissolve into a truly private prayer. His thoughts are between him and God, unperformed for the entire room. Suddenly, the margins of books explode with life. They sprout with personal comments, glosses, angry arguments with the author, even bored doodles and jokes. The book grows ears for an inner voice. You're no longer just a passive receiver of text, you are now in a silent, dynamic conversation with it. This is the birth of the modern intellectual experience. The silent, critical dialogue we call study. From this emerges the great scholastic thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, whose works are monumental feats of silent, analytical reading and cross-referencing. With this new privacy, radical ideas can take root. Heresy, once a spoken crime, can now be copied and spread in secret. Lovers can write letters meant for only one pair of eyes, their meaning protected by the silence in which they're read. The self, the inner life, that voice you hear in your head as you think, that voice now has a library to roam in, a place to grow strong. The space on the page created a fortress for private thought. Once you grasp this pattern, this stark and beautiful realization, you start to see it everywhere. The power of a deliberately designed absence. That little piece of nothing, the white space, wasn't just a design tweak, it reorganized our entire workflow of thinking. We don't just read words, we read the gaps that define and empower them. Space is the switch that turned a public broadcast into a private thought. And its fingerprints are all over our modern world. In places you might never expect. Every time you open a well-designed app on your phone, you are looking at a direct descendant of a Carolingian manuscript. The clean layout, the generous white space between paragraphs, the easy-to-read fonts, that is the legacy of Alcuin of York, channeled through centuries of design theory, all engineered to give your eye and your brain a feeling of calm, clarity, and control. Conversely, now think about the opposite. Think about those terrifying terms of service agreements or the fine print on a credit card offer. What is their design signature? They eliminate the space. They crush the text together into a dense, intimidating, visually hostile block, a weaponized, modern scriptio continua. Its design is not meant to be read, it is meant to be scrolled past. Space clarifies, but a strategic lack of space can conceal, confuse, and control. The ethics of whitespace are very real. Luxury brands understand this intuitively. Their logos often use vast amounts of empty space to signal elegance, confidence, and quality. Cluttered, noisy design screams cheapness. The silent space has become a language of its own. Next time you're on a subway or a bus, look around. You'll see a sea of people, packed tightly together in physical space, but each utterly alone, utterly silent. They are all together in a private room made of glowing rectangles, their eyes darting in those little saccades, their mouths still. They are all practicing Ambrose's miracle, powered by a 1,300-year-old accessibility hack from an Irish monastery. Let's go back, for the last time, to that scribe's desk in the North Atlantic. The room is cold. He grips his quill. He trims the nib with his penknife, dips it in ink, touches ash to the tip to thicken it, and before making the next stroke on the precious sheet of calfskin, he pauses. He leaves another gap. A tiny meadow of parchment where a future mind can stand, rest, and think for a second. That single, small decision. That deliberate act of restraint. It outlived his monastery. It outlived Charlemagne's empire. It outlived kings and revolutions. Because in that interval, in that engineered silence, we learned how to think alone. So here's the verdict: a well-designed absence is one of the most powerful technologies of freedom we have ever invented. The space to think, the space to read privately, the space to disagree in silence before you speak. And if that journey from a humming scriptorium to the silent room in your own head fascinates you, there's another story about a simple, overlooked invention that completely changed the course of human history waiting for you on the end screen. You won't want to miss it. But first, I have a question for you. This invention gave us the power of a private reading experience. So think about all the things you've read in your life. What's one book, article, or even a letter that you remember reading that felt completely private, like it was a secret whispered only to you? Tell me about it in the comments below. I'm truly fascinated to hear what text built a room for you. We uncover hidden stories like this every single day, the invisible technologies and ideas that shape our lives. If you believe the past is packed with vital clues about our present and future, hit that subscribe button and join our investigation. Thank you for thinking with me today.